Hi everyone, this is Serhat. My guest today is Mounir Benchemled. He is the founder of Paraswap, one of the leading DEX aggregators in the market. Hi Mounir, welcome to the Curious Learners.
Hi Serhat, it's a big pleasure to be here.
So what does it mean aggregating liquidity in a marketplace? What does it provide for users? And why do we need it maybe more for crypto?
Yeah, so when you think about aggregation, you can think Expedia, Booking.com, Kayak, and all of that. Basically, for these guys, it's about finding the cheapest price and the best deal. And it's very similar when it comes to exchange of value in general, either in crypto or even in the Forex markets or stock markets, where we try to connect to markets and get the prices that are available in those markets and getting the price that is either the best out of those or even beating the market price. That's how we call it with Paraswap, which means delivering the user a deal that they cannot find by themselves, and they need the software and an automation to get that deal for them.
So I'm quite familiar with this analogy from your previous interviews as well, which makes a lot of sense. This is obviously more complicated than booking flight tickets perhaps, but is there also another layer in the sense that here users themselves obviously participating on the supply side of things, whereas in booking flight tickets, it's only primary issue, so to say, there is one set of suppliers or centralized suppliers. And I think that makes it much more interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's an interesting angle. Maybe we can compare it more with an Airbnb price comparator or something like this, where you get the supply coming from the crowds and the demand coming from the crowds, and they both meet each other in a software that's going to try to optimize that. But of course, yeah, in exchange of value, things are way different. You cannot go to two hotels at the same time. The best what you get is the best or cheapest at a single time, while if you're doing trading, you will be hitting multiple exchanges at once. So yeah, that's, I would say, it's a key difference. And obviously, in the context of decentralized exchanges, the liquidity itself is coming from anyone compared to centralized finance or traditional finance. And of course, compared to airline ticket companies and hotels.
Look, I'm happy because in preparation for this podcast, I was thinking, okay, maybe I can add this comment to this analogy. So there's this 6 year or so between the time you met blockchain Bitcoin in 2013 and 2019 when you actually started building Paraswap. What was it like during that 6 year time frame, given you were so much passionate about the space and you were spending all your spare time in crypto? And it was certainly a fascinating period on a lot of fronts as to what happened in that timeline. But what was the most interesting thing for you?
Yeah, I can start maybe with the regrets that of not buying it at that time, of being too focused only on the tech and not really on, on just buying some. I would say the shift in the growth that we've seen in the market is just impressive. 2013, 14, 15, we were talking about a small market. It's like a niche market with a bunch of geeks making money and building something they call the future of finance. That wasn't even a thing. And even in 2019, when we started Paraswap, well, things look like very small, look like Bitcoin in 2013, where it was very small and the overall crypto community wasn't really paying much attention to DeFi. So we've seen the growth of crypto between 2013 and 17 when it became established and everyone in the world know what's crypto and what's Bitcoin, to 2019 when there is a new category that became emerging, in 2020, 2021, where now everyone knows what's DeFi and everyone talks about DeFi. Even presidents and heads of states are talking about literally decentralized finance. So that shifts in that growth in the space is super fascinating and proves that we are something really interesting, and the premises that we had in early days of Bitcoin and crypto are now delivering, and we can see that in reality.
That's actually a great point which you just made, Mounir. So you obviously qualify as one of the early cohorts of blockchain adopters. But what was the vision that you got attracted to when you started looking into blockchain? And I'm also curious to hear your take as to whether we were able to execute that vision successfully. How did we do so far?
Yeah, I think it comes to a lot of things. Well, first of all, about self-sovereignty. Individuals, especially in emerging countries, where states can be, say, states are dominant. I mean, those are not democracies, and whoever is leading that state can do whatever they want with the country's money. And with the result that we know, like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Argentina also recently. But when individuals have access to a money that is neutral from any government, no matter where in the world, and I think that on itself is a unique value proposition for crypto itself, or crypto as a money, like Bitcoin, ETH, and others. So that was very attractive to me at that time. Like, how can individuals have a neutrality when it comes to money, something that cannot be manipulated by any kind of government, either in an emerging government and even a developed governments, but also about fairness, because when you are under the mercy of a US dollar or euro, or what you've seen recently on the euro performance, you are under the mercy of a particular policy. But when it comes to a neutral money, it's the market that decides. Right now, we are still not there, I would say, in that sense, because, well, Bitcoin is still super volatile. Crypto in general is very volatile. We are still in progress when it comes to that. But I think we are on the right path of delivering on that premise, which is achieving fairness when it comes to money and self-sovereignty.
I totally agree with you. And in fact, a good friend of mine, Chris Arulia, he's Chief Product Officer at BCB Group, Business Crypto Banking. So I listened to him on a panel recently, and all the panelists were asked this question: today's kids, so in 10, 15 years time, what are they going to say about crypto? And his response was that they're not going to call it crypto, they're going to call it money. So I guess that's the vision that you just also outlined here. So I guess from here to there is a lot of things to do. But if you take a step back now, so what you're building is a complicated financial services platform. How did you even internalize the problem back then when you started and build it? Because as far as I know, and happy for you to talk about your background as well, you have been a software engineer before Paraswap. You were not necessarily in financial services, so to say, yet you were able to see this problem and build Paraswap.
Yeah, so I was a user of decentralized exchanges. And at that time in 2017, the dominant one was Ether Delta. And I don't know if you used it at that time, but it was super frustrating to use Ether Delta. And that's what all we had at that time. And it was, working to an extent that we can find liquidity, especially if you were doing ICOs at that period. So I was a user of Ether Delta, and I thought that, well, there is an interesting opportunity. First of all, for me personally, because I could have done something better than that. And the markets maybe deserves a better decentralized exchange, since it is aligned with the values of crypto. It didn't make sense to me neither that, well, crypto is decentralized, custody is obviously decentralized, but the exchange is super centralized. We have to go through a new types of banks that we call centralized exchanges in order to buy and sell crypto. It didn't make any sense. So in my opinion at that time, and obviously still stand with that, is that the exchange has to be decentralized in itself, not just the custody. And it won't make any sense, because if you have Bitcoin, or if at some point you want to sell it to another crypto or to another currency, having to go through a centralized exchange and to give out control to that centralized exchange, well, we miss the point of decentralization in the first place. So to me, decentralized exchanges are the future, and CeFi is here as a temporary hack, because, well, the tech at that time when it started, like we're talking here about 2012, 13, 14, at that time, we didn't have the infrastructure to build DEXs. But in 2018, well, actually we had, and it was developing very quickly. So I thought this is the best timing to start working on a DEX. And we have a success story called Ether Delta. So let's build a better version of Ether Delta, an exchange that will be as efficient as a Binance or a Coinbase and others. So that was the initial idea. And while doing some research and working on this, I was not really a lot into DeFi. DeFi wasn't even called DeFi at that time. We had only white papers and some proof of concept. There was not really. But, well, when I started, a few weeks later, well, I saw that Bancor was doing very well. Uniswap just barely launched a few weeks before, and Kyber was about to launch their V1. So I thought, wait, maybe the AMM model is very interesting. And maybe I don't even need to reinvent the wheel. These guys maybe do it very well. Those are super legitimate projects. Let's build an aggregator. Like, we have now the supply. It's small. but summed up in a single place, it will become much better. If we have 5 exchanges with 1 million liquidity each, if we sum them all, we have access to 5 million liquidity at the same time. But also I thought maybe we should build something that anyone can use, like a Coinbase, but decentralized, so it doesn't have custody. So that was where I arrived, and that was what I decided to start building on. Meanwhile, I was still doing some freelance work on the Web2. So when I started, I launched that product. It took me like 2 months. But the thing is, it was a very naive approach, because building a decentralized exchange or an aggregator for the crowd, it just wasn't the right time. People didn't even know what's a decentralized exchange. For people, exchange means Binance, Coinbase, and Kraken. So yeah, it had a lot of excitement, but no usage at all, which led me to build the product for the DeFi crowd, like a DeFi niche at that time. And right now, I think the DeFi ecospace and crypto ecosystem, has matured, and product like that will make sense. And now we are empowering this kind of product with our API and smart contracts.
I want to unpack that frustration that you had at the time with existing products back then. Obviously, you as someone carrying the true spirit of crypto, decentralization, money which is not controlled by nation states, etc. You were into the infrastructure, whether it is decentralized or not, as you just described. But to an average user, obviously the user experience is much more important. So to what extent your frustration was also about user experience, and you wanted to address that too?
Yeah, I mean, that was the motivation for starting Paraswap, is the user experience. And that means the experience like in the UI user interface, but also the experience overall, like being fast, making design decisions on the product overall that will make the user feel that they are doing whatever job they are intended to do without having to think twice before doing any action, or like be scared before doing any action. So I think, yeah, the user experience was the main motivation for starting Paraswap itself, because at that time, you was a decentralized exchange. There was also Oasis, but it was still under heavy developments, where it was super expensive. You can make a transaction, you made the deposit, you have to make a transaction. It was quite expensive and quite frustrating. But I definitely agree. The user experience was the key, and even more right now. The thing we have right now is we are lucky enough to have a very, let's say, more or less mature tooling ecosystem, where we can build dApps that don't feel like dApps, that feel like Web 2.0, where users don't have to even know that they are under blockchain. We are still not there yet in an absolute way. Like, you still have to bring in the MetaMask and have a seed phrase and so on. But it's orders of magnitudes better in terms of UX compared to 2018, 2019.
And also, I'm curious to hear your take on the integration of DeFi with CeFi. So I guess you are on the camp of them working together versus DeFi replacing TradFi and CeFi, which I agree with that as well. But we will get in a few minutes. I want to stay on the early days of Paraswap. So obviously, product market fit is a critical element of building any startup, and it separates success from failure. At what point after you started Paraswap did you feel like, yes, this is working? Because I guess, as you alluded to it a little bit as well, it was not necessarily huge volumes traded on the platform right away.
Yeah, so it went through multiple iterations. The first one didn't work at all, like almost zero volumes. But yeah, the mistake was on the target users. That wasn't really accurate. But then focusing on a niche, which was the DeFi community, that's now quite big, I started having the signs that we are onto something, because we went from having we went from tracking visits to the websites to tracking volumes. That was already a shift at that time. So I was like, okay, so now we're making volumes. Things are becoming interesting, but also having very accurate feedback. Before, feedback I used to have is, I went to Paraswap, but I don't see Bitcoin. Well, it is using smart contract. It is using what? Sorry. So this kind of discussions, I was like, okay, no, this is not going to work. That's not the product I'm building. That's not the crowd I'm supposed to target, unless I should either change my target or change the product. So I went for, okay, the future is decentralization. Let's maybe focus on the decentralized crowd as we are building a niche product. So once I did that, I think the first week, we started getting some good volume. At that time, if you're getting $1,000, $2,000 a day, it's a good volume. I mean, because Uniswap was bragging that they made 1 million in a day. I think the top they had was like $5 million in 24 hours. So that's what DeFi looked like at that time. So volume started to pick up until early 2020, where we started seeing multi-million dollars trades on a single day. But the fact that we were making over 100K a day meant that given the size of the markets, given the growth of this ecosystem, we can consider that we are very close, at least, to a product market fit. But it became quite clear in 2020 with DeFi summer. We had the product market fit for the DeFi niche, but this niche is no longer a niche. Now it's an established ecosystem. So I can say like 6 months later, more or less.
Such a fascinating journey there. And Paraswap evolved a lot in just 3 years, I mean, alongside the industry growth. And it's almost like this base platform-based framework on which you can build a lot of other things for users who come to Paraswap. But what's been the most satisfactory part of the journey so far? Obviously, it's very early days, and we will talk about the roadmap, the future plans as well. But so far, what did you like the most in terms of delivering value to your users?
Yeah, well, first of all, in our perspective as a team in Paraswap, the most satisfying part is seeing people trusting our software and processing millions of dollars. And we've seen transactions that are over $100 million in one trade, and people feel comfortable doing that in a piece of software. At the end, what we built is open source code that you can read on Etherscan, and people, they go through that and they use it and they feel confident. So that was a very satisfactory. But we've seen many stories. For instance, when we did our airdrop, when we launched our token, there were some users, I think it's in Philippines, they got a good sum of tokens and they used it to finance some project in their village. And they sent us the photos in Twitter and they thanked us a lot. That was very fulfilling for the team. I mean, it happened by accidents. That wasn't, I mean, we just airdropped to anon addresses randomly based on some criteria. And these guys, they received a very good, because if you're in Philippines, if you're receiving 20, 30K, it's a lot of money and you can achieve a lot of that. So they made major projects happening in reality just because they got this money that came out of nowhere. So those were one of the most interesting parts that we've seen, where we were able to help some people while still delivering them a lot of value. And they also brought a lot of value because, well, they did some volume, they were active users, they did a lot of things. So yeah, that was one of it was very intriguing to the team of seeing that tweet.
Looks like it's where DeFi meets real world in a very impactful way. That's interesting. And again, talking about this last 3 years or so, Mounir, what's been the biggest challenge to your business? Perhaps, more specifically, what seemed easy in the beginning where you thought about the problem and building that, but proven otherwise? Or if there's an example other way around as well, I'm happy for you to talk about it too.
Yeah, well, obviously, as any startup, it's always hard to get to the early users. Now, maybe we take things for granted that these guys are coming and trusting us with their funds and making transactions through our software. But in the beginning, it was hard. And also, what you get prepared of as an entrepreneur is in unfair markets, that the market is not fair. It doesn't value how good you do things. It values how well you are able to convince people that your thing is better than others. So how good you sell the product, basically. So it was an iterative process. I mean, luckily, I was a part of a startup before since early day. I also did some small things like selling product and importing product and selling them online. So I went through that process before. It wasn't the first time. It was a bit harder because we're asking people to use our smart contract to make exchanges. In the end, there was just me on the team. I say we, but yeah, it's like me, myself, and I for the first 12 months. And it was hard to convince people that the product is better. And we were seeing other competitors that were not really as good, but we were delivering better prices, better performance and stuff, but people were still using them. So it took some time to convince people that things are otherwise. And I think it's a matter of persistence, because it's not, things may seem unfair and many in the individuals will give up. But I think it's just a matter of time. It's like when you're fishing, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen immediately, but you have the passions, it will come at some point. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, is this bootstrap, this early phase of making sure we get the fair share of the markets. But it was for us to build this fair share into arrive there.
What's Paraswap today, Mounir? If you take a snapshot, how do you define the different parts of the business? I think there is obviously a retail part, but also a B2B side of things. What's the mix?
Yeah, so Paraswap, I see it as a middleware that facilitates value exchange. Right now, we're talking about tokens and NFTs and purely digital assets, and that's what we facilitate. So Paraswap is an infrastructure product, and our user interfaces, mobile or web, are users of that infrastructure. So it's been an infrastructure play since the beginning, but now as the market matures, we see Paraswap as an API or a middleware to make it more abstract for multiple use cases. In my view, it is a B2B product. We built a public version, it's a user interface and mobile app, so that we want to be the first users of our own, but those are users of the Paraswap, I would say, middleware.
And I think maybe we can go back to this question when we talk about the roadmap, and it's a loaded question. I appreciate it, but where do you see the bigger potential for Paraswap?
Yeah, so right now we have the current market that's growing. So I think the current market is a great opportunity, and the growth of the current markets brings a huge opportunity, and we can bring a lot of value to the current users, whether those are retail or companies or protocols. But in the future, I believe personally that blockchains will be used for finance. They will be the back end of finance, and real world assets will be traded on blockchains. Not necessarily the way we do things right now, maybe in different ways, like in using layer 2s or like layer 3s or whatever. But whatever we're delivering right now to end users will be valid in the future. And that you can see it also in Forex markets, where there is a big fragmentation. There are many markets, and what you call best execution platforms are central to this game. The only difference is that those are expensive softwares used by only brokers, and barely few people, like very specialized people, know about them. The paradigm shift here is that the same tooling, the same very efficient tooling, are accessible to average Joe, but also accessible to a bank that needs to trade on chain. It can be trading of crypto, like what we're doing right now, or trading for anything else. And the same, or like an upgrade of the current architecture, can serve these guys in the future.
And I mean, in terms of your retail users, I don't know to what extent sort of you are studying them in a lot of details, but how do you categorize them? I'm sure there are all these DeFi maximalists and power users, crypto natives, etc. But who else comes to your platform? What's your observation of your user base?
Yeah, so our target users, even if we call them retail, but in reality, these guys are DeFi native or like crypto natives who come to Paraswap in general for very specific reasons. It can be they are doing farming somewhere and they need conversion to convert their token. For instance, I'm going to LP on a pool and I need more ETH, so maybe I'm going to sell some token for that ETH, doing some arbitrage with other protocols, and so on. So those are very technical use cases that these guys are doing using Paraswap. There's a small set of retail, like people, it depends at the end how we call retail. If we call retail by the use case of buying tokens and expecting them to appreciate in value, we have some, but these guys I think are mostly on centralized exchanges, not really on Texas, maybe better more on Polygon. But even with that, I think the use cases are not the same. So I would say for our users, which is aligned with our targets, those are DeFi native users that come to use Paraswap in a very contextual way.
And I think that's a validation for you. So those people, highly sophisticated, they know what they're doing. If they are choosing you over other venues of exchange, then that says something.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's exactly how we see it.
Okay, awesome. And you have recently launched peer-to-peer NFT trading on Paraswap as well. So when I think about it, at first look, it seems to be almost the opposite of opening up this liquidity in the marketplace, making it available to your users. It's obviously bilateral peer-to-peer. But how did you think about it? Like, what problem are you solving there? And it's been very recent, but how does it look so far?
Yeah, so it's like a module on Paraswap, or like in a use case that Paraswap can do. So it is using our aggregator, and at the same time enabling buying and selling of NFTs. So basically the use case is you have a Bored Ape, an expensive Bored Ape at 400K USDT, and I have, I don't know, ETH, and I can use Paraswap to convert my ETH to USDT and buy the Bored Ape in one transaction. Or also we can exchange NFTs from one peer to the other. And this is a subset or like a use case of a new protocol that we haven't announced yet, but I guess when this podcast will be live, it will be already announced. So it's a new limit orders protocol. We call it RFQ because that was the initial intent. We just kept it because it sounds nice, but in reality, it's a limit orders protocol that allows the exchange of tokens and NFTs, either in peer-to-peer for both, or in a limit order. And also it's open. So it means that other use cases can be built on top for NFT cases or tokens. And we're preparing also a V2 with some cool things. So peer is just a use case among many others. And if you think about it, peer-to-peer, you can do it non-peer-to-peer, which means I can put my item for sale and anyone can buy it. But when we put the peer-to-peer, it means that only one address can purchase that NFT, but it's still connected to Paraswap because it's using the aggregator to enable the peers to buy with any token or multiple tokens.
Awesome. And you already dropped one alpha on the podcast. Thanks for that, though it will be public, looks like, by the time I release this. But what
maybe release before.
But what are some of the other exciting products or features on the roadmap in the short term?
Yeah, what a lot of things which you're basically looking to do is making trading as accessible as possible to users of our users, especially. But if you can consider Paraswap.io, like the app that Paraswap.io is also one of the users among many others, like our mobile app as well. Right now, you have to be a crypto native in order to use DEXs. You need to know what's a seed phrase, what's a private key, what's a sign-in of a message, and so on, which is not the case if you're using a Revolut or using a Venmo or any of those fintech apps. So the focus will be on building this pure infrastructure play that will enable end users to not have to think twice that they are doing DeFi. And an example, the one that we love to see in the market that we may build as well, is I have dollars and I want to buy ETH. I don't care if this is DAI or USDT or USDC. I just know that it is US dollar, that I can see $5 or $20 or $100 in my wallet. I push a button and I buy ETH. And that's it. Or maybe I earn ETH, I buy ETH and I earn yield on my ETH without having to think twice what I'm doing exactly. So those use cases are quite complex in the end user point of view, like in the UX point of view. That's not our play, but our play is enabling this apps to provide this push a button and do your thing in a highly secure way. So this is where we need decentralization. So the idea is to use decentralization to enable security and for our clients to provide superior products to their users.
Awesome. And I guess that's a great point for my next point that I want to discuss with you. So DeFi, obviously, or crypto in general, right? So when it emerged first time, it had this big and, in my view, quite naive premise of, disrupting the entire financial services system and, removing the traditional banks, etc., which was not realistic in the first place. But what's your view on that? I guess you imagine a world where those two worlds work together for security purposes at the back end, perhaps, but for convenience and accessibility purposes on the front end with TradFi and CeFi. But how do you imagine those two worlds working together?
Yeah, well, first of all, there are some cases where using a decentralized service directly is not feasible. Right? To be pragmatic, a bank tomorrow is not going to use Uniswap or Paraswap, the public version. They need clearance, and they have a checklist on custodials and a lot of things that some checkboxes that will not fit. So this is where CeFi has a key role here. Also for fiat on-ramp and off-ramp. I mean, dollars and euros are centralized, so we cannot exchange them in a decentralized way. They don't live on blockchain. So we need also a centralized services to handle that. The question is how. Right now, we have to fully trust those services in order to do the job for us. But I think a future where CeFi will be using DeFi on its backend, or TradeFi will be using DeFi on its backend. And here we're talking more about tech more than liquidity. It will be both, but those actors will be using smart contracts in decentralized infrastructure and leveraging the security of that infrastructure. I think they will be ending up with superior products than what we got so far. We won't be creating big honeypots in those CeFi servers. will be using security of smart contracts, which I think will be an upgrade for the traditional finance in general, like CeFi and TradeFi in general. So I think it's complementary. If we talk about the present without looking into what's going to happen in the next 10 years, just for the present, tomorrow we want to have a bank. We have discussions with some banks for using DeFi. Well, nobody feels comfortable right now for using DeFi directly, besides some individuals that are very excited. But those are large corporations. They have a process, hierarchy, and so on. But to get them what you call the drug pill, in order just to start, well, we can meet in the middle and bring in the same tech and bring in liquidity that is whitelisted and KYC. They can start using DeFi tomorrow. I mean, not DeFi, the tech, DeFi tech tomorrow. And others who can, well, and they are doing that anyways, like, I don't know, Nexo or other Changely, or these guys who are CeFi product at the end, they are using DeFi either to provision liquidity, to use to exchange at a very good rates instead of using OTC desks. So I think it's happening today, and we're trying to bring more value. But I think in the future, DeFi or like DeFi tech will be the back end of the finance infrastructure.
Totally agree. And one critical element maybe of these two pieces of the puzzle working together is regulation, isn't it? So what's the regulatory framework for a DEX aggregator for Paraswap specifically as of today? Obviously, conscious of the fact that there are different processes around the world as to regulating crypto. But what does it look like for you guys today?
Yeah, well, regulation is not my expertise, but I can say from what's at least I can read from what we're seeing in the regulatory world. Well, you have already MiCA, the new regulations that went live in Europe recently. And in its early version, it was very concerning that it included implicitly stablecoins. That's without understanding really how stablecoins work and the role of stablecoins in DeFi. Now, explicitly, DeFi is excluded from MiCA, which I think is a very good sign. First of all, the regulators know what is DeFi and understand what is DeFi. We had conversations with some regulators in Europe in general. They are keen to learn. So that's the calls and the meetings we have made in conferences. Each time we'll meet regulators, they have a lot of questions. Some of them have deep understanding of what's happening, and especially the innovation departments of those regulators, which are always keen to talk to founders and to projects in the space. And those are, I think, the best ambassadors to the regulators to give them a deep insight and explain to them also how things work. We talked a lot to some association. In France, there is one called ADAM. It's a French, but mostly France and European association. They do a lobbying to regulators, and they've done a great job on explaining to regulators how things would work. Now we're seeing the SEC proposing new laws on how to regulate crypto in general. But I think, yes, everyone knows what's DeFi nowadays. And the message we try to deliver to regulators is that let this ecosystem, it's still new. Let it happen. Let it work, let innovation happen, and don't try to over-regulate it, because you cannot regulate DeFi the same way as you regulate TradeFi. It's just not possible. It's gonna just penalize the local startups. Like if it's in the EU, well, EU startups will take a hit, but Asians and US startups will dominate the markets, and vice versa. If it's happening in the US, it's the same thing. So I think it's going to be a very bad idea, as many countries have done during the early days of internet. And it's known story in France, where France tried to have like its own internet, and that didn't work at all. It was a total failure. And I think, countries should embrace this innovation and try to let it happen, because yes, at the end, we have big success stories and big services that will bring to end users at the end. And I feel positive. I don't think we should be anti-regulation at the same time. This would have avoided many, many bad things. Like, remember, Celsius was calling themselves DeFi, and I think this is very bad. Obviously, they're not DeFi. Us who are in the ecosystem, we laugh at this, but people who are not, who are retail or normal people that are not really native, they were buying this thing. They were going to Celsius because, yes, I want to be on DeFi, and that was bad, very bad, I think. So maybe as having some kind of disclosures and like creating clarity for end users, which I think we are doing anyways, like out of good faith. we are making sure that users understand. If you go to Paraswap, we make it clear that if you're not DeFi native, it will be hard for you to get here and that you are responsible for your transactions and so on. So I think the normal DeFi project that we all know and love, they are already doing this work. And I think regulators maybe can get into this angle of transparency and disclosure of information that's we are already doing. They can just like let everyone do whatever the best practices are in the markets.
You as a real builder in crypto, right? If your goal is to take DeFi to billions of people around the world, you can't do this. You, by definition, you can't do this just by remaining outside the regulatory framework. You have to work with them to institutionalize this, to achieve mass adoption and all that. But I also agree with your view that if there are material differences between different parts of the world, then, obviously some people will be, unfavored and some others will be favored in terms of building. So do you think we will achieve a consensus in terms of regulating crypto around the world in the near future?
Yeah, I think so. And I hope so, of course, because this will also create clarity for some big institutions that are now very reluctant to get into DeFi or to just touch DeFi. We built a product, we call it Paraswap Hub, where we talk to banks and some large hedge funds that today they cannot use DeFi, and if there is enough clarity. And I think we can get those guys on board. And the benefit of having those guys is we have more liquidity and more volume coming to the space. So, but I just hope that it will be a smart regulation and iterative regulation instead of, hey, what do we have done in 1930? Let's apply this to DeFi. This is not going to work at all.
Absolutely. If everything goes to plan, what would Paraswap look like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so one of the missions of Paraswap is to deliver this middleware, decentralized middleware that will facilitate value exchange. That middleware has to be fully decentralized. Now, right now, if you use Paraswap, well, it doesn't have any control on your funds. It's just going from the user wallet to smart contract on the blockchain. So Paraswap has no involvement at all. But what we want the whole thing to be fully decentralized. Is this price API that there has to be an AWS server that will return prices to the end users. We want this to be also decentralized. We want this to be challenged and with game theory in order to deliver even better results. So that's the goal, is to see Paraswap in a few years. First of all, serving more than just the DeFi memes and NFTs, tokens, and so on, but also real world assets, but fully decentralized, which means that the way we want to measure this is the core team will go in holidays for 3 months without internet and come back 3 months later and see that Paraswap has even improved and became better. So that's what we hope to see Paraswap. But this is how we're going to measure full decentralization.
That's a great North Star, Mounir. I like that. Awesome. So, Mounir, thank you very much for coming to the Curious Learners, for making the time. But I'm not letting you go just yet. As for everyone, what are you most curious about these days, and what are you doing to learn more about it?
You mean outside of DeFi crypto?
Well, if there's anything outside of DeFi crypto for you, happy to hear. But it doesn't have to be that. Whatever it is.
Yeah. I kind of spend all my time in crypto. I will just sometimes watch few videos. I mean, I watch a lot of politics recently. I mean, I think as everyone, in the wars and all inflation and stuff that's happening in this crazy world right now. And I learned a lot about inflation and the history, and looking more into history of finance. And that's, I think I learned a lot and I enjoyed it. But yeah, I'm watching a few other things, but it's like a fraction of my time on the day when I'm maybe eating and not working.
Awesome. I'm glad that you have some little time to watch some videos on the side while building Paraswap. That's fascinating. Well, thank you very much again, Mounir. That was a lot of fun to have you on the Curious Learners today.
Thanks, Arat. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward for another time.
Thank you.